What's the scariest conspiracy theory about deep space? Story 1. Iapetus is one of the most visually distinctive moons in the solar system. It's two-toned in a way that still isn't completely understood. One hemisphere is as dark as coal tar, the other as bright as snow. A contrast so extreme that Giovanni Cassini, who discovered it in 1671, could only see the moon when it was on one side of Saturn and could never find it on the other. We now know this is caused by dark material accumulating on the leading hemisphere, probably captured from other moons, with the difference amplified by thermal segregation of ice. But the equatorial ridge is the genuinely strange thing. Running along Iapetus's equator is a mountain range that stretches approximately 1,300 kilometers and reaches heights of up to 20 kilometers, taller than anything on Earth, running almost perfectly along the geometric equator of the moon. We have no fully agreed explanation for how it formed. The leading scientific hypotheses involve collapse of an ancient ring system, tidal despinning, or internal activity during the moon's cooling, but none of these has been definitively confirmed against the others. Researcher Richard Hoagland, who also popularized the face on Mars, has claimed that the ridge is artificial, that Iapetus is a hollow artificial structure, and that NASA image processing has deliberately removed or smoothed geometric features that would reveal this. He published detailed image analyses arguing for regular artificial structures. The scientific community doesn't take the artificial structure hypothesis seriously. The ridge's imperfections, its geology, and the physical models that partially account for its formation all point toward natural processes rather than construction. But the ridge is genuinely unexplained at a level of specificity that makes we don't fully know how this formed a true statement. It runs along the equator of a moon that is already one of the strangest objects in the solar system. Science has a partial answer. The complete answer is still being worked on. Story 2. The face on Mars is the original modern astronomical conspiracy, and it's worth knowing its full arc, because the arc itself is interesting. In 1976, the Viking 1 orbiter photographed a region of Mars called Cydonia and captured an image of a mesa that, in the specific lighting and resolution of that photograph, looks remarkably like a humanoid face. 2 eyes, a nose, a mouth, symmetrical. NASA scientists noted at the time that it was probably a natural landform, but that the lighting made it look face-like. The image went public. The rest happened. In 1998, the Mars Global Surveyor photographed Cydonia with significantly better resolution. The resulting image showed a natural mesa, eroded, asymmetrical when seen clearly, with no face features that hadn't been created by the shadows and low resolution of the Viking image. Case closed, most people concluded. The conspiracy layer that developed after the higher resolution images is the one that makes the story specifically interesting as a piece of epistemological history. Some members of the Mars anomaly research community claim that the 1998 images were themselves altered, that the original Viking image showed something real, and the replacement images were the manipulation rather than the original. This is unfalsifiable in principle. Any new image that shows natural features can be claimed to be the doctored one. Any image that shows artificial features is the real one. The theory reconfigures itself to absorb contrary evidence rather than being testable against it. The 2001 MG's images at even higher resolution, and later high-rise images at higher resolution, still show the same natural mesa. The face community largely moved on to other features in Cydonia. The mesa is still there. It still looks like a mesa. Story 3. In 1998, Mars Global Surveyor photographed the surface of Phobos, Mars's larger and inner moon, and captured an image that has since accumulated a small but persistent following in the anomalous space structures community. The image shows a large, roughly rectangular object on the surface, estimated at approximately 85 meters tall, casting a long shadow that emphasizes its apparently vertical profile against the flat surrounding terrain. NASA's description of the object is consistent, and has been consistent since the image was first released. It is almost certainly a large boulder, ejected from the surface of Phobos by an impact event, and landed upright or near upright on the relatively cohesive soil of the small moon. Large boulders on small bodies behaving in ways that look structurally unusual to eyes calibrated for Earth gravity are a documented phenomenon. Phobos's gravity is extraordinarily weak, and surface dynamics operate differently than anything we intuitively expect. Buzz Aldrin, in a 2009 C-SPAN interview, mentioned the monolith and described it as something that deserved investigation, a comment that generated significant media attention and was subsequently cited in conspiracy discussions as a near disclosure by a credentialed astronaut. Aldrin's comment, in context, was a general point about the scientific interest of Phobos as a potential staging point for Mars missions. He was not describing the monolith as artificial. The coverage that framed it as near disclosure was interpretation rather than quotation. The monolith is a boulder. Its specific shape and shadow in the 1998 image are what makes it photogenic. Subsequent imaging of Phobos has added context to its surroundings without resolving it as anything other than what the original analysis proposed. It is still a very photogenic boulder. Story 4, Oumuamua, was the first confirmed interstellar object detected passing through our solar system, observed in October 2017. It was strange in multiple documented ways. Its shape, inferred from its brightness variation as it tumbled, was more elongated than any known solar system object. Its trajectory showed non-gravitational acceleration. It was moving faster than gravity alone would produce. It had no visible outgassing, which meant the standard explanation for cometary non-gravitational motion didn't obviously apply. The mainstream scientific debate about Oumuamua has been genuine and ongoing. Harvard astronomer Avi Loeb published papers arguing that the non-gravitational acceleration was most consistent with a thin, flat object driven by radiation pressure, a solar sail, and that the possibility of artificial origin should be taken seriously as a scientific hypothesis rather than immediately dismissed. This is a real, credentialed, peer-reviewed position, however contested by most of the field. The conspiracy layer is narrower than the mainstream debate. A subset of the anomaly community claims that the full non-gravitational acceleration data was not completely published, that the numbers in the public papers were sanitized versions of more extreme measurements, and that the true acceleration profile was more clearly inconsistent with natural explanations than the released data showed. The publicly available papers do include the complete acceleration data as measured by multiple independent observers. The measurements are consistent between observers. The data is in the papers and has been independently analyzed. Whether the acceleration is explained by hydrogen outgassing, radiation pressure on a thin sheet, or something else is genuinely unresolved. Whether the published data is the complete data is not genuinely contested in the scientific community. The mystery is real. The restriction claim is not well supported. Story 5 on September 15, 2017. After 13 years in orbit around Saturn, the Cassini spacecraft was intentionally directed into Saturn's atmosphere, where it burned up. The decision was deliberately terminal. The spacecraft was destroyed rather than being left in a stable orbit or simply switched off. NASA's stated reason is the one they have stated consistently throughout the mission's planning. Cassini's onboard propellant was running out, making controlled orbit maintenance impossible. Without active orbit control, the spacecraft would eventually crash into one of Saturn's moons, particularly Enceladus or Titan, both of which have liquid water environments and are considered potential habitats for microbial life. If Cassini carried any earthly biological contamination from its pre-launch handling, crashing an unsterilized spacecraft into a potentially habitable moon would violate planetary protection protocols designed to prevent forward contamination that would compromise future biosignature searches. This explanation is both scientifically coherent and documented in NASA planning materials going back years before the end of mission. The conspiracy theory treats the deliberate destruction as evidence that Cassini found something anomalous. Specifically, something about Saturn or its moons that NASA decided should not remain in orbit to continue transmitting. The grand finale orbital dives that preceded the destruction, which took Cassini closer to Saturn than any previous spacecraft, are the specific context for this. What did it find in those final orbits? The final orbits produced extensive published scientific data, including measurements of Saturn's magnetic field, ring mass, and atmospheric composition. The data is publicly available. It did not produce anomalous published findings of the type the conspiracy framing suggests. The spacecraft was destroyed to protect moons that might have life on them. That's actually the interesting part. Story 6 Saturn's North Polar Hexagonal jet stream is real, extensively photographed, and genuinely puzzling. A hexagonal wave pattern in the jet stream that has persisted for at least 4 decades. It was first observed by Voyager in 1980-81, then tracked by Cassini from 2004 to 2017. Encircles the North Pole at approximately 77 degrees north latitude. Each side of the hexagon is roughly 14,500 kilometers long, slightly larger than Earth's diameter. The pattern rotates with the same period as Saturn's interior rotation, rather than the atmospheric wind speed. Laboratory experiments have produced hexagonal jet stream patterns through differential rotation in fluids. You can get a hexagon in a rotating tank under the right conditions, and the fluid dynamics of Saturn's deep atmosphere can produce similar stable wave patterns. The science isn't mystified by the hexagon's existence in the way that popular coverage sometimes implies. It's a cool atmospheric dynamics phenomenon that is unusual in its scale and stability. The fringe interpretation treats the hexagon as artificial, as a deliberate energy structure, a Stargate portal, or evidence of deliberate atmospheric engineering by an intelligence using Saturn as infrastructure. This framing circulates in smaller UFO and ancient astronaut communities and interprets the geometric regularity of the hexagon as evidence of design, rather than fluid dynamics. Fluid dynamics produces geometric patterns at various scales under various conditions. The hexagon is the most spectacular planetary example. It is not more geometric than what differential rotation in a fluid produces. It is precisely as geometric as differential rotation in a fluid produces. It is also, genuinely, one of the most beautiful objects in the solar system. Story 7 Europa is the moon of Jupiter most seriously considered by astrobiologists as a potential habitat for life. Beneath its icy surface lies a liquid water ocean kept warm by tidal flexing from Jupiter's gravity. The ocean has been in contact with a rocky seafloor for billions of years. The conditions that produced early life on Earth include liquid water, chemical energy sources from rock-water interaction, and time, and Europa has all three. The Galileo probe, which orbited Jupiter from 1995 to 2003, made multiple close flybys of Europa and collected magnetic, gravitational, and compositional data that contributed to the conformation of the subsurface ocean. In 2016, and subsequently, Hubble observations detected what appeared to be water vapor plumes erupting from Europa's surface, analogous to the confirmed plumes of Enceladus. The conspiracy theory in this space, that Galileo flyby data or subsequent Hubble observations captured biosignature evidence, chemical or structural evidence of biological activity, that was not published, and that the timing of the Europa Clipper mission is orchestrated to provide a prepared disclosure framework rather than genuine discovery. The published Galileo data has been extensively analyzed by scientists worldwide. The Hubble plume detections are published, debated in the peer-reviewed literature, and are not confirmed biosignatures. They're water vapor detections consistent with geological activity. The evidence for life on Europa remains what it has always been: compelling circumstantial reasons to look and no confirmed biosignature. The Europa Clipper mission is designed to assess habitability more definitively. If it finds something, the finding will be in the data. Whether the data would be released is the question the theory is actually about. Story 8 on August 7, 1996, NASA Administrator Dan Golden held a press conference announcing that a team of scientists had found what they described as possible evidence of ancient microbial life in ALH 84001, a meteorite from Mars that had been collected in Antarctica. The evidence included polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons associated with biological processes, carbonate minerals consistent with water-rock interaction, and tiny structures that the scientists described as possibly fossil microbial life. President Clinton made a statement from the White House. The paper was published in Science. It was front-page news worldwide. The subsequent scientific response was extensive and predominantly critical. Researchers examined each line of evidence and found alternative explanations. The PAHs could be terrestrial contamination. The carbonate formation could occur at temperatures incompatible with life. And the supposed nanofossils were below the size at which cellular life as we understand it can function. The consensus moved decisively against the biological interpretation. The conspiracy framing of this episode is that the scientific pushback was politically motivated, that the peer community closed ranks to suppress a finding with theological and policy implications too significant to be left open. The swiftness of the critical response is cited as evidence of organized suppression rather than the normal scientific process of examining an extraordinary claim with extraordinary scrutiny. The original authors maintained their hypothesis for years, continuing to publish refinements and responses to criticisms. David McKay, the study's lead author, did not abandon the biological interpretation before his death in 2013. Whether the pushback was legitimate peer review or motivated suppression is a question you can evaluate by reading the specific technical disputes. They are in the peer-reviewed literature, and they are specific. Story 9 Avi Loeb is the former chair of Harvard's astronomy department, author of over 1,000 peer-reviewed papers, and the most credentialed scientist to publicly and consistently argue that the possibility of Oumuamua being of artificial origin deserves serious scientific investigation rather than reflexive dismissal. His 2021 book Extraterrestrial laid out the case. Oumuamua's combination of an extremely elongated or pancake-like shape, non-gravitational acceleration without detectable outgassing, and high galactic velocity relative to local stars were, he argued, most parsimoniously explained by a thin object driven by stellar radiation pressure, a solar sail. This was a hypothesis consistent with known physics and with the data, he said, and the scientific community's resistance to it reflected sociological bias against the alien hypothesis rather than evidential reasoning. The scientific community's response was extensive and specific alternative natural explanations, including hydrogen iceberg outgassing and radiation pressure on a fluffy aggregate of material, were proposed and defended with calculations. The consensus was that natural explanations were sufficient and that invoking alien technology required ruling them out first rather than simply preferring the artificial hypothesis. What the Loeb controversy established as a cultural matter is that the line between serious scientific consideration of anomalous evidence and conspiracy theory is not always determined by the quality of the evidence. It is sometimes determined by the status of the person doing the considering. Loeb subsequently founded the Galileo Project to scientifically search for evidence of extraterrestrial technology. The project is real, funded, and has conducted multiple research expeditions. Whether it finds anything is an open, empirical question. The anomaly was real. The debate about its explanation is genuine science. Story 10 in 2023, Avi Loeb led an expedition to the floor of the Pacific Ocean to recover material from the path of IM-1, an interstellar meteor that had entered Earth's atmosphere in 2014 and was detected by U.S. government sensors. IM-1 was notable for its unusually high velocity and exceptional material strength compared to all known solar system meteors, which Loeb argued suggested it might be of interstellar technological origin. The expedition recovered small spherules from the ocean floor in the region of IM-1's trajectory. Analysis of these spherules found that their composition was unusual. The ratio of specific heavy elements differed from solar system abundances. Loeb published a preprint describing the findings as potentially indicating material of interstellar origin. The conspiracy layer that developed around this is the specific claim that the spherules contained unambiguously artificial material, machined, engineered, or of clearly non-natural composition, and that the published interpretation as unusual natural alloy was a controlled leak, a way of reporting the finding without confirming its implications. The scientific community's response to Loeb's spherule analysis was largely skeptical. Several papers by independent researchers argued that the unusual compositions were consistent with coal ash from commercial shipping in the region, or with other terrestrial sources, and that the statistical controls distinguishing IM1 origin material from background ocean material were insufficient. This is an active, unresolved scientific dispute. Whether the material is interstellar, whether it's artificial if it is interstellar, and whether the published analysis accurately represents the full data, these are all genuinely contested. The question is real. The controlled leak claim is an interpretation of contested data, not a confirmed finding. Story 11, The Vanishing Stars. A survey found 100 stars that existed in the 1950s and don't exist anymore. The Vasco Project, Vanishing and Appearing Sources During a Century of Observations, is a real scientific program that has systematically compared sky survey data from the 1950s with modern catalogs to identify objects that appear in historical data but not in contemporary observations. The methodology is straightforward. If a star or other object was real and is still there, it should appear in both datasets. The project identified approximately 100 candidate vanishing stars, point sources present in the historical data that have no counterpart in modern surveys. Published papers by the Vasco team describe these candidates and the range of explanations that could account for them. The mundane explanations are several. Historical photographic plates are noisy, with artifacts produced by emulsion defects, processing errors, and cosmic rays that create false source detections. Many or most of the Vasco candidates are almost certainly artifacts of this type. The historical data is substantially less reliable than modern digital surveys, and a rate of false detections consistent with known plate imperfections would account for most of the candidates. Some candidates, however, survive scrutiny at a level that makes plate artifact the less satisfying explanation. These are the ones that are genuinely interesting scientifically. Could they be stellar events that produced a brief brightening that was captured in the historical data and not repeated? Could some be genuinely variable sources? Could any represent something more exotic? The fringe reading treats all 100 candidates as real stellar disappearances and proposes explanations ranging from Dyson sphere construction to the Berserker probe hypothesis. The mainstream reading treats the candidates as a mix of artifacts and scientifically interesting anomalies requiring individual investigation. The stars might be artifacts. The interesting ones might not be. Story 12, The Kepler Dimming Logs Theory. Did NASA's Planet Hunter find more Tabby stars and not tell anyone? Tabby's star, Kick 8462852, also known as Boyajian's star, became one of the most discussed astronomical objects of the past decade when citizen scientists working through the Planet Hunters project identified it as exhibiting light dimming patterns unlike any previously observed stellar behavior, irregular, asymmetric, and in some cases dimming by up to 22% over periods of days to weeks. No known natural explanation fully accounts for all the features of the dimming pattern. The explanations proposed have included a swarm of comets, circumstellar dust, an early-stage planetary system, and, most famously, a Dyson sphere under construction, a megastructure being built around the star. The Dyson sphere hypothesis is taken seriously enough to have been the subject of published scientific analysis, though the consensus has moved toward dust-based natural explanations. The Kepler Space Telescope, which monitored over 100,000 stars for the transit signatures of orbiting planets, would have observed any Tabby star equivalent dimming in those stars with enough sensitivity to detect it. The Kepler dataset is public and has been extensively searched by researchers and citizen scientists. The fringe theory that the Kepler mission's own internal analysis found multiple additional stars with tabby star-like dimming profiles, determined that publicizing them would create an unmanageable megastructure media storm, and chose not to release or highlight those light curves. The Kepler data is public. It has been searched by multiple independent groups, including citizen science projects, with tens of thousands of participants. Unusual dimming events have been found by these searches and have been published. None have matched the specific tabby star profile at the same scale and significance. The data is available to anyone who wants to look. The fringe theory requires believing that the public data was also pre-processed to remove the specific targets. Story 13, the Juest anomaly scrubbing theory. Were early James Webb images cleaned of more than just calibration artifacts? The James Webb Space Telescope produces raw data that requires significant processing before it becomes the images released publicly. This is not a controversy. It's the normal operation of space telescope data pipelines. Raw detector outputs need cosmic ray rejection, flat field correction, sky background subtraction, point spread function deconvolution, and numerous other processing steps before they become scientifically usable images. The false color rendering that produces JWEst's iconic images is a further processing step applied specifically for public presentation. The conspiracy theory in this space is the claim that early processing runs, before the images were released publicly, showed anomalous objects, artifacts, or features in the JES data that were removed from subsequently released images, and that the removal was not routine calibration processing, but deliberate excision. The specific evidence cited for this claim is the existence of early social media posts from people claiming to have seen early JWES data with unusual features, combined with the observation that some processing decisions for the public images are not documented in publicly accessible pipeline documentation. JWEST's full raw data is available to researchers on embargo schedules, then publicly released through the Mikulski archive. The pipeline processing is documented in published technical papers. Many JWEST images have been independently processed by researchers outside NASA and the partner agencies, and the independently processed versions match the official releases in their scientific content. Whether specific anomalous features were observed and removed in pre-release processing is a claim that the public data pipeline, independent processing, and archive records are all positioned to contradict if the claim were true. The claim has not produced specific, citable instances of features present in raw data and absent from processed releases. Story 14, the dark matter misdirection theory. What if dark matter is a placeholder for something too useful to explain? Dark matter is a genuine scientific mystery. The gravitational effects attributed to it are real and thoroughly documented. Galaxies rotate in ways that require more mass than is visible. Galaxy clusters bend light by more than their visible mass would produce. Large-scale structure formation requires a mass component that interacts gravitationally but not electromagnetically. Something is there. We haven't detected what it is. The standard scientific response to this situation, postulating a new form of matter that has the required gravitational properties and develops candidate theories for what it might be, then designing experiments to detect it, is the appropriate scientific response to a genuine anomaly. The failure of most dark matter detection experiments to find candidate particles has generated significant debate in the field about whether the particle dark matter hypothesis is correct or whether modifications to gravity better explain the observations. This debate is ongoing and genuinely scientific. The fringe theory adds a different dimension, that dark matter's unexplained gravitational effects are a placeholder concealing government or institutional awareness of exotic matter with strategic or technological value, that the dark matter framing prevents the public from understanding that something specific and exploitable has been identified and is being studied or utilized. The specific mechanism by which identified exotic matter with strategic value would be categorized as unknown dark matter and kept from the scientific community rather than developed as technology is not worked out in the fringe theory. It's a gestural claim rather than a mechanistic one. Dark matter is a real scientific mystery. The misdirection claim is not a scientific hypothesis. The mystery is sufficient without it. Story 15, the Great Attractor Concealment. Something enormous is pulling our galaxy, and we can't fully see it. The Great Attractor is real. Its gravitational influence is measured and documented, and it is genuinely one of the most dramatic large-scale structures in the local universe. It is a region of mass concentration, approximately 250 million light-years away in the direction of the constellation Centaurus, and it is pulling the Milky Way, the Andromeda Galaxy, and hundreds of other galaxies toward it at velocities of hundreds of kilometers per second. The specific observational challenge is that the Great Attractor lies almost exactly in the plane of the Milky Way, in what astronomers call the zone of avoidance, where interstellar gas and dust in our own galaxy block optical and much of the X-ray wavelengths that would otherwise allow direct observation. Infrared and radio astronomy can penetrate the zone partially, and surveys have been conducted that have identified significant galaxy concentration in the Great Attractor region, including a massive galaxy cluster called the Norma Cluster at approximately the right distance. The fringe claim is that the Great Attractor has been more precisely characterized through radio and X-ray surveys than publicly disclosed, that its nature is being deliberately kept ambiguous because what it is would be alarming or strategically significant in a way the scientific community is managing. This is a difficult theory to evaluate specifically because the zone of avoidance genuinely limits what can be observed. It's not possible to fully observe the Great Attractor region with current technology. The fringe theory uses this genuine observational limitation as supporting evidence for concealment. The Great Attractor is probably a supercluster of galaxies, a concentration of thousands of galaxies whose collective gravity is responsible for the observed motion. That's an extraordinary enough object without the concealment layer. Story 16, the Zoo Hypothesis as Active Policy. What if Earth is under a managed non-contact agreement? The Zoo Hypothesis was proposed by radio astronomer John Ball in 1973 as one possible resolution to the Fermi paradox. The question of why a universe apparently old enough and large enough to contain many technologically advanced civilizations appears, from our position, to contain none. Ball's proposal, advanced civilizations are aware of us, have chosen not to contact us, and are maintaining that non-contact as a deliberate policy, allowing Earth to develop independently. The hypothesis is discussed seriously in the SETI literature as one of several possible explanations for cosmic silence. It's not a fringe idea. Whether it's true is untestable with current technology. The fringe layer that builds on the Zoo hypothesis is more specific, rather than a passive policy maintained by unknown extraterrestrial civilizations. This version treats the non-contact arrangement as something that is known to and negotiated through specific human institutions. The Earth is not simply in a zoo it doesn't know about. Specific agencies are aware of the zoo's existence and management structure. This version requires that contact of some kind has already been made, that the zoo managers have communicated the terms of the arrangement to human interlocutors, that those interlocutors are identifiable institutions, and that the information is actively withheld from the general population. What distinguishes this from standard UAP disclosure conspiracy theory is the specific cosmological framing. Not just governments are hiding UFO evidence, but governments are party to an interspecies governance arrangement that determines what the general population is allowed to know about the universe. The Fermi paradox is real. The Zoo hypothesis is a legitimate candidate explanation. The active negotiated policy with human parties version is an unfalsifiable extension that goes well beyond what the original hypothesis claims. Story 17, the Berserker concept, was developed by science fiction writer Fred Saberhagen and has since been taken up by SETI researchers as a genuine candidate explanation for cosmic silence, self-replicating machines created by some now extinct civilization that spread through the galaxy on exponential timescales, consuming resources and eliminating any emerging intelligence they encounter. Under this hypothesis, the Fermi paradox resolves not with empty space, but with a galaxy that has been systematically cleared of life, bearing civilizations by self-replicating automatons nobody programmed to stop. Physicist Alexander Freitas proposed in 1983 that astronomical searches for berserker probes were feasible and might find evidence of probes in our own solar system. The SETI literature has taken the concept seriously enough to discuss it in technical terms. The fringe theory that connects to the vanishing stars data and to other astronomical anomalies, some unexplained observations, the Vasco vanishing stars, certain patterns of stellar dimming, rare gamma-ray burst characteristics, are actual signatures of berserker activity and are being quietly tracked by astronomical agencies without public disclosure to avoid mass panic. The specific claim requires both that the anomalies are real and that a decision has been made by some coordinating body to monitor without disclosing. What makes this theory specifically disturbing as a thought experiment, rather than as a factual claim, is the implication. If berserkers exist and are detectable, the question of whether to disclose that detection is one with no good answer. The disclosure that self-replicating extinction machines exist and are active in our galaxy would produce a specific kind of global terror that we don't know what to do about this would only amplify. The theory is not supported by the evidence. The question it raises about what you do with confirmed berserker evidence is genuinely difficult. Story 18, the Large Binocular Telescope on Mount Graham in Arizona, hosts an instrument with one of the more attention-catching acronyms in astronomy, LUCI, formerly Lucifer, Large Binocular Telescope Near, infrared utility with camera and integral field unit for extragalactic research. The instrument was developed by a German consortium. The Vatican Observatory, which operates its own telescope on the same mountain through a separate agreement, does not operate LUCI Lucifer, though it operates other instruments at the same facility and maintains a scientific relationship with the LB organization. The Vatican Observatory is real and has operated as a scientific institution since 1891. It employs professional astronomers who publish peer-reviewed research in mainstream astronomical journals. Vatican astronomers have made contributions to specific areas of cosmology and stellar astrophysics. The fringe theory conflates the Vatican Observatory's presence at Mount Graham with the LUCI instrument's name and suggests that the Catholic Church is specifically using advanced infrared astronomy to prepare for an alien contact announcement, either to position the Church theologically in advance of disclosure or to be the institution through which disclosure is made. The Vatican's actual public statements about extraterrestrial life are straightforward. Senior Vatican astronomers, including the late Father George Coyne and current staff, have stated publicly that the existence of extraterrestrial life would be consistent with Catholic theology and would not be theologically destabilizing. These statements are exactly what you'd expect from an institution that has thought about the question, not evidence of foreknowledge. The Lucifer acronym did its work. The instrument was renamed LUCI. The speculation about the Vatican's advanced astronomical knowledge is not supported by specific evidence beyond the coincidence of geography and acronym. Story 19, the CMB axis of evil. The universe has a preferred direction, and nobody has agreed on why the cosmic microwave background is the thermal afterglow of the early universe. A map of temperature variations from 380,000 years after the Big Bang that represents the initial conditions from which all large-scale cosmic structure developed. The CMB has been mapped with extraordinary precision by the COBE, WUMAP, and Planck missions, and its properties match standard cosmological predictions remarkably well. With one persistent anomaly, the temperature anisotropies in the CMB, the patterns of slightly warmer and cooler regions, show a statistical alignment when examined at the largest scales that is inconsistent with what standard cosmological models predict. The axis defined by the quadrupole and octupole moments of the CMB aligns with the plane of the ecliptic and with the direction of the CMB dipole. This alignment is sometimes called the axis of evil by cosmologists. The name was coined by Ju Maguejo and Kate Land in a 2005 paper. The statistical significance of the alignment is debated. Some analyses find it highly unlikely under standard models. Others argue that correcting for known systematic effects reduces its significance to coincidence levels. The debate is ongoing and technical. The fringe interpretation, the axis of evil alignment, suggests that the universe is oriented around our position in some way, that there is a preferred direction defined relative to our solar system, which is inconsistent with the Copernican principle that Earth is not in a special location. One fringe reading takes this further. The universe was constructed or observed from outside in a way that established this alignment, and the cosmological community is suppressing discussion of the implication. The anomaly is real. The debate about its significance is real. The constructed universe interpretation is a philosophical leap that doesn't follow from the anomaly even if the anomaly is confirmed. Story 20, Sedna's impossible orbit. Something pushed this object where it shouldn't be. Sedna was discovered in 2003 and immediately presented a problem for our models of the outer solar system. It is a large object, approximately 1,000 kilometers in diameter, orbiting the Sun at distances ranging from 76 to 936 astronomical units, with an orbital period of approximately 11,400 years. This orbit is genuinely difficult to explain. At Sedna's closest approach to the Sun, it is well beyond any known planetary influence. Neptune's gravitational influence extends to approximately 30 AU. The Kuiper belt, where most trans-Neptunian objects live, extends to roughly 50 AU. Sedna is beyond all of this, on an orbit so elongated that it barely comes close enough to the solar system's outer edge to interact with anything. The standard explanation for Sedna's orbit involves gravitational perturbation, either by a passing star during the Sun's birth cluster, by a yet undetected large planet in the outer solar system, or by interaction with the dense stellar environment of the Sun's birth cluster early in solar system history. All of these are plausible mechanisms. The Planet 9 hypothesis is the most actively researched. Several trans-Neptunian objects, including Sedna, appear to have orbits clustered in a way that gravitational shepherding by a large, distant planet would explain. The search for Planet 9 is ongoing. The fringe theory treats Sedna's orbit as evidence of deliberate gravitational engineering, that some massive object, not natural, has been used to deflect Sedna's orbit as a marker or for a functional purpose. The orbital tampering framing borrows from mainstream Planet 9 discussion and strips out the planet. Sedna's orbit is genuinely strange. The gravitational mechanisms that might explain it are mainstream science. The engineering theory is not. Story 21, Voyager 1's heliopause wall. Did something unexpected happen when we crossed into interstellar space? On August 25, 2012, Voyager 1 crossed the heliopause, the boundary where the solar wind's influence gives way to the interstellar medium, becoming the first human-made object to enter interstellar space. The transition was detected by specific changes in the plasma environment measured by Voyager's instruments. The density and character of charged particles changed dramatically in ways consistent with crossing from the Sun's plasma bubble into the interstellar plasma. The transition took longer than expected and was less sharp than some models had predicted. The boundary between the heliosphere and the interstellar medium appears to be more complex than a clean edge. There are multiple nested boundaries. The magnetic field behavior was surprising in several respects, and the low-energy cosmic ray profile changed in stages rather than all at once. All of this is published, peer-reviewed, and the subject of active scientific discussion. The heliosphere's boundary is genuinely more complex than pre-Voyager models suggested, and understanding the transition region is an active area of heliophysics research. The fringe reading. Voyager's instruments briefly detected a structured boundary, not simply a plasma density change, but something with an organized, non-random character that was reclassified in public releases to conform to plasma physics expectations rather than reported as the anomalous signal it supposedly was. The Voyager 1 plasma science data is public and has been independently analyzed by multiple research groups worldwide. The published transition data has been consistent across independent analyses. The claims of a structured boundary in the public data that was reclassified are not supported by what the public data shows. The heliopause is strange enough as physics without the additional layer. Story 22, the Pioneer Anomaly. The mystery that kept physicists awake for 30 years before a boring answer ended at the Pioneer Anomaly was one of the most carefully studied unexplained phenomena in spaceflight. An unexplained tiny deceleration affecting the Pioneer 10 and Pioneer 11 spacecraft that persisted for decades and resisted every conventional explanation. The anomalous acceleration was in the direction of the Sun, amounting to approximately 8.7410 m/s, a tiny number, but consistently present and consistently unexplained by known physics and engineering. For decades, physicists proposed and tested alternative explanations: dark matter, new physics beyond general relativity, modifications to the law of gravity. None fit. Papers were written. The anomaly was real, the data was clean, and the conventional explanations were insufficient. This made it specifically interesting to people who thought it might be evidence of something genuinely new about physics. Evidence that general relativity fails at solar system scales. Evidence for a fifth force. Or evidence that the spacecraft were experiencing something no known physics could account for. The resolution came in 2012, when an international team performed a comprehensive thermal analysis of the spacecraft using recovered engineering data and digital modeling. The result? The anomalous acceleration was entirely accounted for by anisotropic thermal radiation, heat radiated asymmetrically from the spacecraft's power systems, pushing the spacecraft in the direction of the anomaly. It was a known effect that had been underestimated in previous analysis because the full thermal model of the spacecraft had not been completed. The conspiracy theory framing of this, the thermal explanation, was developed and accepted quickly to close off a line of inquiry that was producing uncomfortable results for standard physics. The boring answer was convenient. The thermal analysis is detailed, public, independently reviewable, and matches the anomaly's magnitude, direction, and time evolution. The boring answer is boring because it's correct. Story 23, the Opportunity rover's final transmission. What was in the last photos before the dust storm killed it? The Opportunity rover operated on Mars from January 2004 until its final communication in June 2018. When a global dust storm reduced sunlight on its solar panels to the point where the battery depleted and the rover went silent. NASA attempted to contact Opportunity for over a year before declaring the mission complete in February 2019. The rover's final data transmission before the storm overtook it included scientific readings and photographic data from its current position in Perseverance Valley on the rim of Endeavour Crater. This data was received, processed, and is part of the Opportunity mission's public data archive. The conspiracy theory in this space is that the rover's last transmitted images, which the fringe claim describes as showing anomalous objects or structures, were not fully released to the public. The specific content of the alleged anomalous images varies in different tellings of the theory, but the claim is that NASA's processing of the final data involved selective release. The Opportunity mission data is publicly archived through NASA's Planetary Data System. The final images before communication loss have been publicly released and are viewable. The specific anomalous objects claimed by the theory are not identifiable in the archived final images. What the final communications from Opportunity actually included was a lower quality data set than usual, because the dust storm was degrading the power and data quality of the rover's systems as it went into its final low-power state. The last transmitted data was limited in quality and scope by the physics of the rover's situation, rather than by editorial decisions. The rover's last image shows a darkened Martian sky. The dust had blotted out the sun. That's what ended the mission. Story 24, the Chang Far-Side Theory. Is China investigating structures that Earth-based telescopes can never see? China's Chang'e 4 mission, which landed on the lunar far side in January 2019, was a genuine first-in-space exploration. No spacecraft had ever landed on the moon's far side before, primarily because the far side has no direct line of sight to Earth, and requires a relay satellite for communications. Chang 4 used a relay satellite called Kichao to maintain communication. The stated scientific rationale for a far-side landing is real and significant. The far side is shielded from Earth's radio interference, making it an ideal location for radio astronomy. The far side surface has different geological characteristics from the near side, including the South Pole Aitken Basin, one of the largest and oldest impact craters in the solar system, which the later Chang 6 mission targeted. The far side's isolation has genuine scientific value. The fringe theory: China chose far-side landing specifically to investigate surface features invisible from Earth-based telescopes, structures or anomalies that could be observed and studied without the supervision that any near-side landing would receive from Earth-based observation. The specific anomalous features the theory points to are various. The fringe community has identified what it considers geometric structures in far-side imagery, unusual formations that don't match standard volcanic or impact geology, and objects photographed by the Yutu-2 rover, including the Mystery Hut. The Yutu-2 Mystery Hut's resolution, a rock shaped like a rabbit that the Chinese media called a jade rabbit in homage to the rover's name, is a clean example of the pattern this list of theories repeatedly demonstrates. Low-resolution imaging creates apparent geometric features that disappear under higher-resolution investigation. Story 25: The Sputnik Planitia Hidden Ocean. Pluto's heart has a sea underneath, and the data about it is still being argued over. Sputnik Planitia is the western lobe of the heart-shaped region on Pluto's surface. A vast nitrogen ice, plain approximately 1,000 kilometers across that, was one of New Horizons' most striking discoveries in 2015. The plain is smooth, young, and appears to be actively convecting. The nitrogen ice is circulating in a slow-motion churning process driven by heat from below. The heat from below implies an internal heat source. Models of Pluto's interior developed after the New Horizons flyby suggest that a liquid water ocean beneath the ice may be responsible, kept liquid by radioactive decay, heating the rocky interior, insulated by the ice layer above. Published papers have argued that the specific shape and location of Sputnik Planitia, positioned near the equator facing away from Charon, is consistent with tidal locking effects that would result if a subsurface ocean redistributed mass in the planet's early history. This is mainstream science, published in peer-reviewed journals. The subsurface ocean hypothesis for Pluto is not confirmed, but is a serious scientific proposal supported by multiple lines of evidence from the New Horizons data. The fringe theory: the full compositional data from New Horizons instruments, which could more precisely characterize what's beneath the ice, was delayed in release by approximately a decade to obscure something about Sputnik Planitia's origin or content. The delay in full data publication is cited as evidence. New Horizons data has been released in tranches through NASA's Planetary Data System as processing is completed, which is the standard and expected data release process for planetary missions. The delays in specific dataset releases reflect processing complexity rather than suppression. Pluto having a liquid water ocean is interesting enough without the suppression layer. Story 26: The IS Feed Cut Deep Space Variant. When the live camera goes dark, what is it not showing? The International Space Station maintains a live video feed through NASA TV and through streaming services that has been continuous for years. The feed cuts to a technical difficulty screen with some regularity, for reasons that NASA's own documentation acknowledges include orbital position, planned switching between cameras, computer restarts, and other routine operational causes. The common version of the IS feed conspiracy theory focuses on UFO footage that the feed allegedly cuts away from. The variant in this collection is more specific. The claim that feed interruptions correlate not with local UAP phenomena, but with the IS's instruments detecting unexplained deep space transients, high-energy events, anomalous signals, or detections that are interrupted before they can be captured in a way that would be obvious to viewers. The IS is not a deep space observatory. Its instrument complement focuses on Earth observation, microgravity science, material science, and crew health. The few space-facing instruments on the ISS are not optimized for detecting deep space transients, and ground-based and orbital observatories designed for exactly this purpose, gamma-ray bursts, fast radio bursts, gravitational waves, are far more capable and are producing published data continuously. The feed cut theory requires that the ISS's cameras, whose resolution and spectral range are optimized for Earth observation and crew video communication, are regularly detecting anomalous deep space events that purpose-built detection instruments are not simultaneously detecting. The feed cuts are boring. They're technical. The coordination that the theory requires, cutting the ISS feed within seconds of a detection that purpose-built instruments simultaneously miss, is harder to make work the more specifically you describe it. Story 27, the missing NASA scientists' whisper network. Researchers who found something and were quietly reassigned the missing NASA scientist theory is the most loosely organized claim in this collection. A network of claims circulating in anomalous astronomy communities that researchers who have published or nearly published unusual deep space findings have subsequently been quietly reassigned, discredited through professional channels, or simply disappeared from the public record of their field. The theory is specifically difficult to evaluate because it doesn't identify specific individuals. It's a pattern claim. People who got too close to publishing anomalous findings without naming those people, their findings, or the specific mechanism of their suppression. This is the characteristic form of an unfalsifiable claim. The unnamed individual who discovered the unnamed anomaly and was suppressed by the unnamed mechanism. This is not to say that professional suppression of unwelcome findings in science doesn't exist. It does. Scientists who publish results that threaten established frameworks, who challenge well-funded research programs, or who make claims that professional consensus has rejected, can face real career consequences, not through conspiracy, but through the normal operation of peer review, funding decisions, and professional reputation. This has been documented in specific cases in various fields. The specific version of this theory, in the astronomy context, lacks the specific cases, specific individuals, and specific findings that would be necessary to evaluate it as anything other than a gestural claim. Avi Loeb's case, a named, credentialed scientist who published anomalous claims and experienced significant professional pushback, is the closest thing to a documented instance, and his career has continued at Harvard rather than ending. The Whisper Network exists. The specific disappeared scientists don't have names attached to them. Story 28, the Kessler Syndrome engineered scarcity theory. Is orbital debris being used to restrict access to space? Kessler Syndrome, the scenario in which a critical density of orbital debris produces a cascade of collisions that makes entire orbital bands unusable, is a real and documented risk that space agencies and commercial operators take seriously. The Iridium Cosmos collision of 2009 and the Chinese ASAT test of 2007 both significantly increased debris populations in important orbital regimes. NASA and ESA published debris catalogs, and debris avoidance maneuvers for active spacecraft are routine. The fringe theory, the risk of orbital debris, is exaggerated or partly manufactured to justify restricting access to specific orbital bands where strategically valuable assets, surveillance platforms, signals intelligence systems, or other classified infrastructure operate by declaring specific orbital regions at elevated debris risk. The orbital equivalent of a no-fly zone can be established with technical rather than political justification. The specific version that is circulated involves the claim that the debris tracking data used to assess collision risks is controlled by a small number of operators, creating a single point of control over which entities can be told their planned orbital trajectory is debris conflicted. The debris tracking monopoly concern is real and has been raised by non-fringe actors, including commercial space companies that have raised questions about transparency in debris conjunction warning data. Space Force does maintain the most comprehensive debris tracking catalog, and access to the most detailed data is not entirely public. Whether this asymmetry is being used to engineer access restrictions is a governance question rather than a physics question, and the governance question is worth asking. The specific manufactured debris risk claim is harder to support with the available tracking data. Story 29 Europa Clipper and the Prepared Disclosure Theory. Is the mission designed to find something or announce it? The Europa Clipper mission, launched in October 2024 with arrival at Jupiter's system expected in 2030, is a NASA flagship mission designed to conduct detailed scientific investigation of Europa, its ice shell, subsurface ocean, surface composition, and geological activity. It will conduct approximately 50 flybys of Europa over its primary mission, gathering data intended to assess whether Europa is habitable and to guide the planning of a potential future lander. The mission is also, scientifically, the most serious investment in the question of whether there is life in Europa's ocean that has ever been made. The instruments aboard are designed to detect biosignatures in material ejected from Europa's plumes and to characterize the ocean's chemical environment. The Prepared Disclosure Theory in its Europa Clipper form, the 2030 arrival date, was chosen to provide sufficient time between the mission's launch and its arrival to develop public readiness frameworks, communication strategies, theological and cultural preparation, governance discussions for a disclosure of existing evidence of life in Europa's ocean that has already been found from earlier observations. Under this framing, Europa Clipper is not designed to discover life. It's designed to provide the occasion for announcing life already known. The discovery will be credited to Clipper data because a credible, recent scientific context is required for the announcement, rather than an explanation of why evidence found in 1997 Galileo data or 2016 Hubble plume observations was held for 30 years. This is not supported by specific evidence of existing life confirmation. The Galileo data has been published and independently analyzed. The Hubble plume observations are available. The Clipper mission's instrument design makes sense as a mission to discover rather than to announce. The mission is real. The discovery, if there is one, is genuinely ahead of us. Story 30, the question the universe is asking. What is the scariest deep space theory? We've been through 30 theories, artificial moons and vanishing stars, and berserker probes and prepared disclosures. Some of them are documented scientific anomalies with fringe interpretations attached. Some are pure imagination given astronomical coordinates. Some sit in a space between genuine scientific uncertainty and conspiratorial elaboration that is genuinely difficult to characterize cleanly. The scariest deep space theory isn't the one with the most evidence behind it. It's the one that, if true, would most completely reframe everything. The zoo hypothesis with human parties to the agreement is terrifying, not because aliens are watching, but because it means the institutions we depend on for information about the universe are administering a managed ignorance program. The universe would be as vast and as full as it always was. Our access to understanding it would be rationed. The berserker theory is terrifying not because of the probes, but because it answers the Fermi paradox in the worst possible way. The silence of the universe isn't absence, it's aftermath. We're looking at a graveyard and calling it emptiness. The Cassini forced suicide is terrifying not because of what Cassini found, but because of what it implies about the calculus of knowledge management, that we've already developed frameworks for deciding what discoveries are too significant to share. But the theory that sits at the center of all of them is the simplest. What if we are already in contact, already have been for some time, and the specific cognitive architecture of modern civilization, the media environment, the educational infrastructure, the cultural output, the conspiracy theory ecosystem itself, has been specifically designed to ensure that the evidence, distributed everywhere, is never assembled by anyone whose assembly of it would matter? That theory doesn't require classified documents. It just requires that the system works exactly as it appears to work. And that's the one that doesn't have a rebuttal.